What's up, man?
Hey, Charlie.
Let's start slow, dude. What's
Sure, yeah.
yeah. What's the current I don't know, man. What's on your plate? I don't even know if you've been writing a bunch of music. I assume you have, as always, but
Uh, you know, I've um proceeded in kind of fits and starts. Uh, so right now things are more on the I'm organizing teaching things because I am in the middle of a academic school year.
oh yeah.
But I'm also working on a big piece. I hesitate though to talk about what I'm working on because so much I've kind of given up on work during this whole pandemic situation.
Dude, thank you for saying that, Alex, man, because you are like my model for work ethic. And I'm like, dude, I'm like no longer an artist, dude. Like, what's going on, man? Anyway,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, I've gone through some really dark, you know, dark days thinking about why I should be doing anything, and
Dude, I know.
so and it also stems from just so I had some projects, some really big projects for me that were supposed to happen last April, and I remember even thinking up to I don't know if you guys ever have this thought where you know something's just a few months away and you try to just visualize it happening, and then you say to yourself like, oh, I wonder if it's going to be like this or like that. And then you end that thought by saying like, well, I don't know how it's going to be, but I know it's going to be, right?
Exactly.
I always have that thought. And then to have these big things just not, they just evaporated. Not aside from that being a letdown, one of the ways I work is just kind of very experimentally. And I don't mean that in like a high tech way. I mean, like I hear the stuff I did, and if I liked it, it's like, well, this stuff worked and I'm going to keep that, and this stuff didn't, and I'll get rid of that. And then I can move on to the next piece because I feel like some things have been tested and some things have worked out and other things have failed. So since I had a bunch of big projects, and when I mean big, I don't just mean in scale. I mean, maybe I was trying out a bigger swath of material than might typically be the case. I don't know what to do next because I still have stuff waiting to be tried out, so I'm kind of stuck, and it's been a little bit depressing, and yeah, that's where I find myself.
Well, that's a cool way for it to be depressing, though. The fact that like, well, because you said like I don't know why I'm doing this. I mean, that's the like really existentially dark shit.
Yeah.
But the other thing you said is like not as dark, because you're kind of just saying that like on the sort of eternal student vibe, or like the sort of constantly evolving thing, the thing that you really need to hear your most recent thing to even do the next thing, which is, I mean, that sucks that that's being derailed. But I mean, I don't know. That's a cool, like, I don't know. Never heard you say that. I don't know. Just the idea that like it actually, like each piece, like you really feel like each piece is like a brand new thing that you're trying out, like every time.
No, and that's what I mean. There's proportions of newness in each piece. What I mean by that is some pieces are maybe an iteration of a number of ideas that I know work under certain conditions, and then I might want to change the conditions to see if those things still work.
Right.
And then so you're essentially kind of whittling down towards some kind of essential features that might run through a certain kind of stream of musical ideas. And then you might decide, or I might decide that these have now, maybe I've iterated on these things enough, but instead of throwing them all away and opting for a whole new set of things that I really don't know much about, I'll usually have some proportion of old and new, and see then what works out in that piece. Like if the old things seem really tired to me, or if the new things work at all. In other words, yeah, there's definitely always a mixture of new and old, but I'm usually not one of those folks who just discards everything I've been doing.
Right.
Yeah, and not just for, I just feel there's like an icky disposableness to any kind of progressive music. You know, I'm in a branch of music that often talks about being like avant-garde and experimental and all that, and yet it's also this weird thing where everything is kind of dead on arrival because there's such a fetish for the newness of it.
Oh God, we got to talk about this progress, man. The idea of progress.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been really getting like that's super fraught for me. That idea.
Yeah, so I'm sensitive to this idea of I want to make stuff that I already feel, as you know, I told you just a moment ago, I already feel queasy about, like, why am I making this stuff in the first place? And then if I'm going to make it, should it just be instantly disposable? but I mean, I guess that's also a deeper question about how music functions in any one person's life. I mean, we all have different things we're going to do with this stuff. So anyway, that's kind of my work ethic through the pandemic is, yeah, I've got stuff going on, but I'm certainly, you know, I know other people, for example, that have really taken on to like, I'm going to produce stuff, do collaborations, you know, remote kind of things and exchanges. And I'm really happy for those people. And I've been able to check out some of that stuff. But I have to say, I made the other choice. I just hit pause and was like, I'll see you guys when I see you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
no, totally. Yeah. I mean, it's also, you know, in the realm of like writing for ensembles, chamber music, orchestra music, it's like, pandemic's got to really squash that in a particular way, because it's like music that relies on live, at least to me, music is so about live performance, like more than rap or something. And it relies more on live performance, and yet there are also fewer live performances of it. Like, you don't take an orchestra on the road, so it's like very much about the live performance, and there's this long build-up before there is a performance, and you're working on the score for a long time. So it's like, yeah, you're thinking about future performances of your stuff now, which obviously will happen, but it's like you don't know when, and there won't be 20,000 performances of one piece. You know, there's going to be like one or two, you know, so yeah. Fucking dude, I remember this time. I don't know if you remember this, but this was a learning. We're not going to do fucking memory lane, but too much. but I do have to say, I don't think I've ever told you how influential this was on me. Early in Z's, there was, I don't remember what piece it was, but you came in with the 11/17 scores, the classic, you know, the huge things, handwritten, and you had this new thing that was like, and you just wanted to try out just you and Sam's horn parts, and it was like, you know, the most meticulously notated, like, you know, multiphonics, fingerings, and like, you know, just like this really like just obviously just like hieroglyphics level of like notating shit. And then it's like, and you like ran and you ran through it for like a second, and you're just like, nah, this isn't working, forget it. And so get up, and like, and we were like, no. Sam was like, no, dude, we could keep, like, we haven't even. And you're like, I can tell it doesn't work. It's forget it. And I was just like, bro, like, that's quality control. I was like, you know what I mean? So you're talking about throwing out your ideas. I was like, that is a really good way of busting your own balls, to not follow through on some idea because it like seemed like a good idea, to just absolutely just, you know, like be honest with yourself. I was like, that was informative for me. Oh,
I got to say too about this whole handwritten thing. So over the years though, that has also been a real learning thing for me that I go back and forth on, which is realizing like what is precious about the thing. And by that, I mean, is like, where is the thing? First of all, is it the music? Is it the score? And then which part is precious, and by what metric is that preciousness derived? So if you work really hard on a meticulous score, you get like the work that it took to make that thing might obscure to you the reality of, you know. So I've often had to tell myself, if I'm making something look too good in a preliminary stage, I might say to myself, hey, Alex, don't fall in love with this. It might just suck.
Right.
So don't make it too precious at this stage. And by precious, I mean just from the work. Like, don't spend too many hours. Like, don't use a ruler. Like, it's something simple like that. For right now, let's put away our ruler. And if we go to a rehearsal and this stuff works out, then we'll break out the ruler. You know what I mean?
Oh, right. But see, then there's also like, I mean, that's the like healthy sort of critical mindset of like, kind of, without overreaching, this sort of fetishizing of writing in the West. I don't, you know, that's a thing, right? I mean, just everything being written down, being critical at, but at the same time, I mean, investing that kind of crazy labor in something that does kind of imbue it. I mean, isn't that a sort of cathexis of like energy, where it's like, just even to hand somebody a score where that much labor has gone into it?
Yeah, and I didn't mean to
create like a vibrance to even just to the social situation. I mean,
no,
I
totally.
was kind of took that as a thing, you know, like,
yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. I just meant I've had to find ways to somehow find balance with that. And I also didn't mean to suggest that it's exists strictly in, like, as you pointed out, in like the written text. So you could put that much labor into anything via any other, you know, whether it's just through rehearsal time with colleagues or whatever. I just mean for me, there's some distance, or I try to create some kind of at least awareness of the amount of labor in something versus what it actually amounts to.
Yeah.
And just some distance. And for certain projects, the distance not there. For other things, it's more distant. And I guess I bring that up just to say there are certain things that even to this day, I know they don't work, and I find it hard to throw them away because it's just like, oh, I know I'm supposed to throw this in the garbage, but I'm too in love with all the work that I did to get to this spot. And that just becomes, and so I always do ultimately feel proud when I do tend to ultimately throw it away. And yeah.
I get worried. I'm like, are there things that I'm hanging on to which don't suck, but maybe everything would be even deeper if I just completely shed this one aspect of what I'm doing? You know, I start to wonder, like, man, like, am I actually following through on certain things that are not, you know?
I mean, question. No, I have that question too. And but that's also, it circles back to that issue of like the music being disposable. Sounds like I'm maybe contradicting that, but it's actually in service of that, which is I kind of want to get something that I like. And then once I have that there, I iterate on it from piece to piece in different proportions of bringing new stuff to bear on, you know, that otherwise, you know, old material.
Yeah. Preciousness is that's a thing that just an idea or a vibe I think about a lot. It just in my own practice, other people's practice, just different methods of making music. Like, well, because I know you, because, you know, with like improvisation, right? Improvised music, it's like that in the moment process, it's the least quote unquote precious thing you can do, but the practice, you know, that people go through to be improvisers is this ascetic, self-building, you know, religious process. So it's kind of it's like a different type of work where but even then it's not precious. Remember we used to joke, it's memory lane, but still I still joke about
I don't get to talk to you that often, so
I know. Yeah, we do have to reminisce a little bit. And plus it's like a essential part of like the history of music, like what we've done together. So whatever, it's fine. But like no, they're like I don't know, like we used to joke about how like when you run into a composer, like a new music composer, and you haven't talked to in a while, and you're like, yeah, so what's been going on with you? They always go, I'm working on this piece, man. That's always, it's like this just tormented, like, dude, what, you got diagnosed with it? You have a piece, man, you know, you have like a terminal composite, you know.
Yeah.
But I know that you work pretty fast. I know that you tend to write, I mean, maybe not by your own metric, but I mean, compared to, I think, most composers, I mean, you tend to write pretty fast. And I know that you've kind of, the way you talk about, even with this sort of apparent preciousness of the hyper note, you know, the handwritten scores, I know you've also talked about how you write fast and you like don't overthink things and you have improvisational elements and like, how does improv work into your like writing process? I don't actually really know that.
Yeah, good question. Well, first I improvise. So I just, as a saxophonist, I still frequently improvise either by myself or with other musicians. And then, yeah, how it feeds into my composition is maybe a little more difficult. You kind of alluded to it a little bit by there's just the space that maybe I create for myself to reflect or not reflect on what is happening. Though I also have to say that what you're mentioning about the pace at which I write music, that has greatly changed over the years. And now I find that I'm maybe even gratuitously slow. So I don't know. I haven't really reflected on that enough to give you a good answer. But yeah, I think a lot of the improvisational ideas come from this back and forth with what I think is underneath the surface of the music. And by what I mean by that a little bit is that for a lot of improvisation that I experience with other musicians, the substance, the what of it is often the interaction itself. And there are certain folks that might actually be listening by that metric. In other words, the kind of sonic surface of the music is less perceptible than the interaction between the two voices or the three voices, or how many people are joined. And so I think about that too in written compositions, like to what degree am I controlling this conversation, and like, is there an apparent interaction between voices or not? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. Okay, well, let's go deeper into that, but on an even less like a less deep level. I mean, do you like improvise on improvise on saxophone and record it and then use elements from that when you write? No, you don't.
No, I don't do that.
Yeah. I didn't think so. Yeah, but yeah, I know I hear that in your stuff as far as like the interaction being. I mean, because a lot of the time you have a very at least initially define a limited set of sounds from each instrument, you know, like, and then they're bumping up against each other in different ways and then combining to form other sounds. Yeah. And then the piece goes on and it could actually go to be something completely else. But there is that thing of the interaction being being as important as the sounds themselves. Man, I mean, yeah, it's like, I don't, something that when I think of your work, especially compared to like other people in my life or people that I've worked with, is when you're able to talk about your work a lot and very clearly, and you seem to be like, you can talk about your stuff in terms of musical materials and how they're organized, like sound and time and form and perception of those things, without necessarily talking about any kind of like cultural associations, or do you know what I'm saying? Or like personal expression, your life, the world, politics, you know, you're really dealing with the medium in a way that I don't want to put labels on it because I don't want to shoehorn it into like, but I mean, I think of modernism, or just that at least the idea of what that meant in the 20th century. I don't know. I know you're very into like abstract expressionist art and you get a lot of direct inspiration from that world. I don't know, like
well, yeah. So I would say a lot maybe of what you perceive to be my own reflections on my own music, and the way I describe it, like, to what degree do you believe my narrative? You know what I mean? And so like, there's the way people talk about their own music, and there's like what their music actually is. And sometimes they don't even know that they're telling lies. So, and then, so you don't know whether you're talking to somebody who's pitching you a personal mythology, and you don't even know if they're aware of their own personal mythology, right, or not. So I would also caution you, like, do you even know if I believe myself? and but here's what I will say, because here's where I'm going with that, is that I do tend to talk about my music in a rather abstract way. But because of this idea that I might even be misinterpreting, or but this idea of storytelling in general, which is, you know, a kind of diegesis versus mimesis, and in other words, narrating a story versus showing the story.
Okay.
And so I often am trying to show the story, but through the narration of an abstract kind of description, right? So if you hear me talking about a work in program notes, and I'm not mentioning necessarily anything social or political, I might be talking about very almost like mathematical or physical, like that might be, you might have to question that. Like, what am I maybe showing? Like, what am I showing in the music that I'm not narrating?
Yeah. No, so I feel you. Well, actually, you know, you're talking about personal narratives. It seems like your narrative is like trying to be as little of a narrative as possible. It's like the narrative of no narrative. It's like the narrative of transparency, like just to be talking about the sound and how it's unfolding. I mean, it seems like you're like trying to be the least bullshit that, you know, like the most sort of undeniably true. I mean, because I don't know, like people's narrative about their own work, that's one of the things that I always criticize about it's not criticized, but something that has always put me off of academia or just the realm of like working is that you have an obligation to be able to talk about your work, you know? But I've always kind of pointed to your work as being like, see, Mincek is a guy who can do that, and it's not some added bullshit. It like is actually makes sense, and you know, like it actually is true to the music. But see, maybe I'm just projecting that it's true. I think it's funny that you'd be that's kind of to be like, maybe it's not true, but I
well, no,
I buy what you say.
No, I guess what I was saying is I also am sensitive to wanting to be like true about what I'm saying with the piece, but I say only as much as I can kind of be right about. And even that part about being right is more about describing how the piece is rather than what it is. Like when I describe a piece, the reason I'm right is because I don't presume to know what the piece is. First of all, I have a kind of confidence about describing it because I can tell everybody right up front, I'm describing how this piece is, how I made it, what I thought about. And somebody could say to you, you know, I might quote some philosopher or something and say, you know, that's bullshit. That's not what so-and-so meant. And it could be like, that's cool. I'm just telling you how the piece is. The piece is my bullshit about this voice.
Right.
So I think that I generally walk it up to that line where I know how things are. And what I meant by the kind of more mimetic quality is then I might have suspicions about what that piece shows, but I'm less confident. And I'm also less, I find the idea of kind of pointing people toward that less attractive anyway. So it's not that I don't think about some of these issues, like I don't think about, and this is where the personal mythology I might be giving myself away a little bit. I steer away from really personal things, not because they're not there, but because I'm really insecure about expressing them. And so I do kind of have my suspicions about what I think I'm saying with a piece, but I typically, my first kind of wall of explanation is usually the physics of the sound to some, because that's the other thing. I mean, we can talk about further, but music, just how it functions is so crazy because there's a social aspect undoubtedly, but there's also this whole like mathematical and physics domain where for some people, you know, the music doesn't even need to have a listener. It can just be like the study of acoustics or waveforms or mathematical processes and stuff. So I often find myself too battling with what do I think I need a piece to do? Like, you know. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, people's narratives of personal expression, dude. I'm done also with that. Like because I maxed myself out ever since like post Z's, getting into being a singer and then lyrics and then things being about things. I'm just like, I'm coming full circle. I'm like, I did it. It's back to just melody. It's back to just sound. Like I have to just go, you know. So, but as far as like, well, yeah, cause like, I mean, yeah, you're not imposing narratives on it, but even just what you're thinking about when you're writing, I mean, you are thinking about, I mean, you said, yeah, you take inspiration from painting. I mean, you're thinking about surfaces, perception in time. I mean, we should talk about that. See, because, okay, yeah, because I know that, you know, you and Sam got me into theory through, yeah, see, this is another interesting thing. Okay, so like theory, especially the stuff that we were hitting back in the day, Deleuze in particular, he's like way back in style now. But it's so much of it is from this political angle. Mm-hmm. But I remember you hipping us to Deleuze in ways that had to do with form and time and materials and repetition and the smooth and the striated and these things that had really no social or political or even human, really like, you know, properly human subjective qualities. It's like very much about like materials and time, and Bergson too. So I know you said, you know, you're not like standing by those people as like permanent touchstones for your stuff. I mean, do you think about either of them? I mean, I don't, because I know time, you know. I haven't read that stuff for maybe about 10 years, but I still hold a lot of where it kind of pointed me. I still hold a lot of that stuff pretty close, which is, well, let's just take, you said the smooth and the striated. I mean, yeah, I still constantly think about that. Like, I try to be aware of a regulated space versus a less regulated space. So what do I mean by that? okay, let's take it to musical terms. You start low and you want to get high. Now, which path can one take? If I take the piano, the lowest note on the piano, the highest note, it's very regulated. There are 88 keys. That's a grid. And if I use a if I use a sweeping oscillator, that's like an infinite continuum between those 2 points.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but then, I mean, that's an oversimplification, because then you can have multiple grids and then you can trace through all of those grids a smooth space, right? So you can create smooth spaces out of collections of grids. And for me, instruments are all grids, right? So like a violin is a grid, and it's a grid by many kind of dimensions. It's got the 4 strings that are traditionally tuned in a specific way. That's a grid. And then it's got what your left hand does, which is, play the fingerboard. That's a grid. And then it's got what your right hand does with the bow. That's a grid. The bow, that's a grid.
Yeah, exactly.
You could say structure, whatever.
Yeah, territorialization of some kind. Yeah.
So my point is, that is stuff that when that reading did hit me a little bit, and I could have found it in other places, but that idea of negotiating, that not that a striated space, or in my terminology now, I often just think of grids, that one space is better than the other. It's just knowing when you're in one, so that you don't create this, you don't have this false sense of making choices that aren't choices. Like, you know what I mean? Because that's the difference between a smooth space for me and a striated one. So like, to get to a social aspect of that though too, it's like, when I think back to how I got into music, I had a sense of, I remember ending up in jazz band because the conductor, the band director was like, there's like solos people can take and you can just make stuff up. And I was like, well, I want to do that. And so I ended up in this space. And by this, I mean like the grid was this idea of jazz, right? So there's a language and a syntax and various idioms of jazz music. But I was there because I wanted to improvise. And now I'm all of a sudden in this thing, this structure that is this social constructive music. Yeah. And then you find yourself being really attracted to aspects of that language or syntax, and then that spins off into. So you find yourself in all these different. You find yourself in all these different spaces that you might not have gotten into these spaces because you wanted to, but they were like these like state structures that
these available regimes.
Available regimes. So so I do think about that, and I do think about when I'm negotiating with instruments, that they can easily be taken for social metaphors. It's just, in a description of my work, I would rather, again, show that rather than talk about that. So there are, in all these assemblages that I might make, or paths through various grids, I do want people to maybe think about that as being something that could be a metaphor or symbol or a kind of way of thinking about navigating any aspect of one's life. Well, so what would then again? So like, what would be like a purely smooth space? Like that's always sort of harder to say. Like if we're because you're talking about sort of tracing smooth spaces through grids, but like on the because you're saying like the. Yeah, it seemed like you're saying like the 4 strings on a violin. That's a grid. Well, you can't find pure smooth space. I mean, again, my understanding is that's the whole. My favorite book by Deleuze is Difference in Repetition. And
you motherfucker, dude, that's known as like the most difficult one. I mean,
that's the one that you really just get into, like everything is just negotiating difference. So, and so when you say like, well, how do you find a smooth space? Well, like just to take really, first of all, really general image or analogy, it's like a nomadic space, right? Like walking in the desert versus a striated space, like the same desert, but you have a map or like
or the city,
But then there's already grids within that nomadic space but they're subjective, and that's what I was going to say. The state striate, like the regimes, have a space that is equidistant for everyone, or at least there's or for whoever they're trying to have traffic in that space. They have, in other words, points of reference that are meant to be objectively observed. Where when I'm just walking around in the desert or swimming in the ocean, I still have a striated space, which is my own way of keeping time in the space. So how do I find my way? I look at the sun, or I know that I've been traveling this long because I'm this amount of tired. In other words, there's all these kind of like, I'm still regulating the distances, and I'm still regulating. And those things are, but that's just like it's a more narrow margin of difference. So it's very clear. We can all view the difference. Now it's this more internalized, like subjective notion of difference. So I think some of what for me, and again, these can all just be misunderstandings, but some of what I consider the idea of a striated space versus a more smooth space is the idea of how many people have access to navigating it or understanding its navigation, like, or the inner subjectivity problem, like
things are more striated just the more people are on the same page with what the striations are.
Yeah.
Or like the less micro local they are, the more extension there is of the grid, or in some way.
Well, yeah. I mean, just think about taking taking a chant or some otherwise music that doesn't, from just hearing it, you might not have a clear idea of how time is passing. And then if you put a beat behind it, like certain aspects of the chant are going to have points of reference that are apparent to everybody. Like you're putting a grid again onto something. It's not better or worse than. I'm just telling you, like, the way you're going to negotiate time is different because it's not going to be as intersubjective. It's still going to be subjective, but maybe not to the same degree. If you're walking up a slight incline, it might take you a minute to recognize you're inclining. Whereas if it was on steps, you can't help but notice. That's
what. Yeah, isn't there? That's like an Alvin Lucier piece, right? Where he does like there's some, or no, it's not Alvin. Sorry, Alvin Lucier talked about. I think it's a Robert Ashley piece, like something where you're like taking off your jacket so slowly that people don't even notice that you're taking it off. Like, is one of these things of like perception with the slow time. Like I remember us talking about Bergson with like Zeno's paradox, like that vibe, right? Where so it's like the arrow is going at any point, you could freeze frame it and say that it's at a certain point. So then is it ever moving? Because at any given moment it's in a place, right? That kind of thing. That's sort of like that. I can sort of think of that. I hear that. I think of that Zeno's paradox thing of like that smooth. I know, because I know Deleuze is really
into Bergson. Yeah,
it really into Bergson specifically in that way. Where that thing of like you could view a smooth space as just like an infinitely striated.
Well, this is okay. So if I understand where you're going with this, this is where things get, again, when I say like margins of difference. Okay, so take that striation, right? Like, let's say in this case, a musical case, like a beat. But if you speed the beat up, at some point it's going to synthesize into it's going to turn into a frequency, right? So if I go da 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 da, and once I pass 20 hertz, I'm no longer in the domain of periodicity. Well, I am, but I'm perceiving it as a frequency. So that's what I mean. Like, it's margins of difference that you're aware of or not aware of. So like when I hear a tone, like if somebody says, is that a high tone or a low tone? I could be like, do you mean, is it a fast tone or a slow tone? But nobody would say that because, I mean, I don't want to get into semantics, but that's what I mean is being aware of the space you're in. So if I did, I will say that I am aware that, like, if I go low, low, low in music, right? I'm down on the low A of a piano, and then like, say then on a tuba, I go lower than that still. I kind of know where I am in terms of just frequency band, so that if I'm coming right up against, like, I'm in the upper 20s to mid 20s, then like that can be taken over by a drum playing a roll. It's also not quite 20 hertz, but
it's a beating sound. It becomes beating. Yeah.
And then that slows down. In other words, you can kind of traverse these, again, grids, but you're thinking about it in terms of, it's not that there's, again, only that there's grids or spaces. It's that your proximity to them makes them grids or smooth spaces. So again, that idea of frequency being one of them, where it depends on what's being synthesized.
Yeah.
By that I mean, like, I should be more specific. Like sequential kind of synthesis. Like there's the way things confuse across time, and there's the way things confuse simultaneously. And those two things can also be convoluted or coexist, obviously. So you can decide like whether you want to separate parts and sums across like the time axis or across the spectral axis.
I saw that. I get that conceptually, but I don't have like an example like going in my head for
Okay,
for that like.
So like spectrally, I just mean that like if I have 10 instruments and let's say they all play at the exact same time, there's certain aspects of perceiving that are going to lend a sense of fusion to that act.
Oh yeah, right?
So
yeah.
there now we can start operating in gradations of fusion. Like, okay, so I got 10 instruments to fuse. How was I control of that fusion? Well, they all happened at the same time, and that's a huge indication of, and this gets into Gestalt stuff, right? Which is that onset, if things start at the same time, it's likely that they come from the same source. And so that brings up another issue, source. Okay. So then if there's 10 instruments, well, I got these 10 instruments to fuse, but if I really want this sound to fuse, let me put the instruments really close together, because spatiality is another right measurement of how things will sound. So if they're coming from the same place and they start at the same time, they're likely to be fused. We're likely to interpret them as belonging together. Now let's do another one. Now let's say like not only are they playing at the same time, they're in the same space, but now just one person is somehow doing it. Like you start reining in on versions of, like, you get closer to the proximity of fusion, or you get farther away from the proximity. Like things can come apart or come together, but they can also do that in time.
Because I know you've talked about how like the one and the many, you know, is like a big thing for you, and I guess that also kind of gets into the smooth and the striated.
That is,
in a way, because
thing.
Because the smooth is the one. I mean, you know, and then the striated would be like how to make things many. But yeah, it's interesting you're talking about fusion, because I know that idea of like vertical simultaneous fusion. I mean, I know I've thought about that just in the sense of spectral composers. Like I know you studied with Murai, and then Grisey. You know, it's like I love. And I know that when I first heard that music, even without knowing anything about it, the thing that struck me, I was like, oh yeah, those instruments are fusing into something that is so much the sum of its parts that it just sounds like electronic sounds or whatever, you know? So there's that. I mean, that's fusion. Like, I definitely get that, you know?
But it's a kind of meta version of fusion is what I guess I'm getting at, is because, and that's what I mean by like one or many is, if I had to reduce everything that I'm interested in, it kind of is this question of how do we identify, and then how do we, like, what do we call a thing? You know what I mean? And like, when is the, I mean, to be kind of, I don't even think that's overly simplistic. That is the dilemma I have with just like, what is a thing? So to just make a quick example of what I meant by fusing up and down versus side to side, it's like the word cat, right? Like we could like signify that that's one thing. It's this noun that represents this animal. It's cat. We could also say sonically it's like one thing, but when you think of it, it's got an onset, ka, and it's got this a, and that a itself has a morphology, and then it has it has an offset. So it's like, now is it three parts? And then you can say, well, let me look into this more. And then if we analyze the a, or we slowed it down, and that's what I mean by like sequential synthesis. If I slow that down, all of a sudden we're going to find all these
like
parts.
A gradient of the vowel and stuff. Yeah, no, totally. Well, a lot of your stuff, and I hear this in Lachenmann too, who you hipped us to, is just like in time, and I guess Feldman in a way. I don't know, just like the
totally Feldman
on the horizontal. It's funny because I hear a lot of Feldman in your stuff formally, but then also totally not, you know, like in certain ways. But like but yeah, this thing of like being versus becoming, you know, are we in a place or are we transitioning to a place? And that being in a place, it seems like in your music, when things, quote unquote, they never actually, quote unquote, really settle into being in a place, but it's almost like just the rate of change slows down to a thing where we're like, okay, we can call this a thing now. You could call this a section, but it's actually more just, it's almost just the flow of becoming got slowed down, where you're like, oh, okay, this is a striation. We could make a call that this is the B section or something, even though. That is absolutely true. There's like that tactic, but I would say there's other tactics that you kind of mentioned, you know, when you said like you're in a space, like, how is it functioning? Because that's, man, talking about music is so crazy, right? Because there's all of these levels of, there's what it is in any moment, but it's like what it is
maybe pointing towards, or what it is summing up from, you know, previous. So I would say that then these sections or places, as you put it, what could be happening in them is already like really can evoke all these different things. So this idea of kind of wandering in a space versus like clearly moving through a space. So like to stick with the striated and smooth, there's this idea of wandering. And for me, that is like where you might have a process, but the musical process has no aspiration towards a final goal. It's just trying to navigate. It's just trying to get to any point, or it's trying to kind of consume all the points that are available with no order of preference.
Yeah. I hear that. I hear that in your stuff for sure. Yeah.
Right. But then there's other things where there's a clear process where it is made evident, I hope, in some of these processes, where there is an order of preference. Like, so a really, again, just like a really simple example is if like you had like da, 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 da. Now the next thing could be either like 5 or it could be 4. So da, 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 da. Now if it's 4, the next thing is going to be 5 generally, right? Because now I've established that it's this additive process. Now I said 3 could be different because it could have gone to 5, which could have gone to, and I guess I'm even wrong about 4. You know, you could create whatever you want out of that process. But the point is, there's some sense that there is an additive process going on. And but if I went like duh, like you'd have this very disjunct synthesis, and that's it's a little more open to, it's a little bit more like in the ocean where someone would have to kind of be like projecting or like coming up with their own way of like making the like striating their way within that open field, I guess you could say. Like if you have like da and then like da 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 and then da da, like it's a lot more it's not that there is no logic, but there isn't as much it's not as easy to perceive what the logic would be or what the next thing is. So it's like maybe you'd be projecting more about what would be coming up next or something. Do you know this? I think we might have talked about it in the past, but you know this book Malloy by Samuel Beckett? I read it a long time ago. It's got this sucking stones scene in it where the protagonist has these stones and he's talking about all the different ways he can suck on them, but he also he wants to like remember which one he sucked last or something, you know, so he comes up with all this like elaborate plans, and he's going to put, after he sucks this one, he's going to put it in this pocket, and then he's going to suck this other one and put it in that pocket. And then it's really funny. It's like 2 or 3 pages long. And then at the end, he like forgets why he even like, and so this would be like what I would call an exhaustive space. You're just trying to exhaust the thing. You don't care where you end up. Right. But you want to exhaust it. You want to make sure you have sucked all 16 stones. Yes. And you don't really care in the end why. It's a space for you to. No, I hear that. I hear that in your work, definitely. Because a lot of the stuff it'll start out with like several elements that are bumping up against each other, and there might be some that are primary only in the sense that they're happening more than the other elements. But then you'll have like one of the elements that was barely happening at all, that might gradually become the new main one, or sometimes very suddenly that little peripheral one will become the main one. And so like that's a thing that, you know, but it doesn't necessarily mean you've officially exhausted a certain thing if it suddenly changes, but there's a sense of that, you know, or there's sort of. Yeah. Can I just give you another musical example? Yeah. Okay, so let's say for a section, I want the intended object, like what I am focusing on, or what I would like to position as the thing people should listen to. What I want it to be this like kind of ambiguous, whether it's a rhythm or whether it's a singular gesture, so like some kind of like rolled R. Yeah. So I might take a vibraphone motor and turn it to as fast as it can go, and like so you hit a pitch and it's no like, right. And then maybe I'll consider that since that's a motor, I'll call that my bass line. I'm going to now position everything else around that. Now I might find a saxophone multiphonic that I can get to also beat at the same rate as the vibraphone, right?
Right.
Then I might create a sine wave, or let's say two sine waves that again, because of their difference tone, will beat at the same rate. Then I might program a drum machine to go at the same time. And then I might get two acoustic instruments to also play a different interval, but the math still adds up to the same beating.
Okay.
Now, the intended object is just this that everybody else is doing, but they're all doing it by a different labor. And they also each have a different other core identity to how they're producing the intended object.
Okay.
Right? So then that means in the next section, I can concentrate on either any of those labors or any of those secondary identities.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So those are the sort of peripheral background things that are of difference that are like available lines of flight, if you will, out of the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I feel this. I mean, is this what you were talking about, psychoacoustic? You know, I was asking before, I was like, yo, what's up? Are you still into like Bergson and Deleuze? And you were like, kind of, but really psychoacoustic phenomena is more. But this is not really so. You're talking?
I'd say more perception than psychoacoustic. I mean, did because there's when I say psychoacoustics, I guess what I mean by that is just thresholds of how we hear, like where things do change because of certain thresholds and just the way we physiologically hear sound. So I mean, I already brought up one, which is like this idea of hearing periodicity change into frequency. That is just a perceptual threshold that I don't think we can escape. And then, but then there's other ones. But I don't know that if I call them necessarily all psychoacoustic, because some are less physical than others. Well, the other is the top range. When do we hear roughness in a sound? When do sounds capture other sounds through perceptual masking? And then like the time experiential idea of music, like different people will synthesize things at different times sequentially. I mean, a piece I still listen to all the time is that is it OV by
Orthrealm or Mick Barr. Yeah.
Where just like so much of the opening of that, all through the piece, but especially like the first two big swaths, for me are this amazing space, because when you repeat something like that, where there's not necessarily, well, there is kind of a clear loop, like there is a clear like mark of the loop, but the drums and the guitar are just out of phase enough.
Just enough. I know, you get that rub, yeah.
Well, but then you do these perceptual flips where, and I can't remember the lick off the top of my head, but like where what you were hearing flips. And so I'm interested in this kind of thing too. So, but I could just demonstrate that really easily. If I say the word "and," right, like a whole bunch of times, and, it
becomes Dan. Yeah.
It becomes Dan or dance and sand and these kind of things.
Yeah. Turns
so where you take a thing and but I'm interested in when do those things happen? What speed do they happen at?
Yeah.
What consonants and vowels do, or, you know, in musical terms, like what degrees of noise versus tone or signal. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm interested in all that stuff. Now I don't mean it to, when I said I'm like into that stuff, I don't necessarily need people to know or listen to the music in that way. It's
that's
just
what's going into it though. That's what's
like
going into it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the creative spur for me. It's like stuff that I just think is kind of fun.
Sometimes I think about that in terms of like genre, you know, like at what threshold, or in terms of like the sort of the extra musical, social, cultural connotations of something. Like, you know, something like genre, or which is like a very much a regime, you know, or like a striated thing, like you had to go into jazz band or whatever. Like, just like thresholds of perceiving that kind of thing, like at least to different people, like at what threshold do you perceive something as new music type, classical type composition versus like at what point, you know what I mean? Especially because, you know,
totally.
I do so much stuff, and, you know, we have such that history and that sort of overlap with like something like Orthrealm or these sort of, like music that comes out of the DIY or the noise thing or the post-punk thing or metal. Absolutely. You know, like I think about that a lot, just sort of like what kind of attention something demands or invites, or yeah, like types of complexity and like different types of death metal and tech metal, how that, you know, like at what point, because like with something like I don't know, something that one of the things that I love about the world of quote unquote contemporary music, and I just wonder what your thoughts on this are, is that there's like, it's like the genre of no genre. I mean, it's like the idea of like,
wait, which thing is like that?
Like quote unquote classical music. I mean, not really, but you know what I'm saying? Like people say contemporary music, but they mean music written for, I mean, you might not mean that when you say it, but you know, in general.
I don't say it anymore. Actually, I'm really at a loss. Usually when people, and this is pretentious as well, but when people ask me what I make now, I usually just say, I make non-commercial music. And then they say,
okay.
And then they say, what do you mean? I mean, I make stuff that like people aren't going to buy. Like there's not a there's not a market for it. And,
okay.
and I don't mean it too like flippantly. I mean, really, it's not a commodity really.
Right.
It's strange. And that's why I also feel weird about like, sometimes why am I doing this?
But I mean, you come out of, though, this is the thing, though, it's like, see, I don't know, sometimes I wonder if I, like, overly, like, try to pigeonhole things into boxes, but I'm more interested in, like, how people's work relate to supposed boxes or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Just like, all right, I'm trying to think how to say this, like, well, I mean, as far as your background, like, you have studied classical music and are familiar with the canon of European art music to an extent that matters a lot. I mean, it matters to your work. I would say, I don't know. I mean, it appears to matter to your work.
Yeah, that's true.
Enough to be worth mentioning and thinking about. That doesn't mean that your music now would be called classical music or whatever. But I definitely, when I hear your music, the extent to which form is important. I mean, the extent to which how it's experienced in time is important, to me, makes it part of this lineage of classical music in a way that rock music is not. Like, you know what I mean? Like, to me, the difference between what you're doing and just like a pop song, I mean, to me, the difference isn't actually the sounds. The difference is the type of attention. Absolutely. You know what I'm saying? Like the type of psychology, or like, you know, just the kind of attention or headspace and that it takes you into based on time. You know, well, like you don't hear like a pop song and be like, damn, like those proportions really fucked with. Maybe you do. Like, well, I
was just gonna add to it that it's maybe even this is an and, certainly not a but. Like it's also just the dissonance people might have to practices or mannerisms within certain of these regimes. So I bring that up because, for instance, I was teaching a course on string quartets a few years ago, and I was just in the beginning of class, I was playing this Lachenmann piece, Grand Torso, which is just all these like very, very small sounds. And
I know that shit. Yeah.
There was a violinist in the class who walked in, and they put their hands over their ears, like they were like very it was very troubling to them. Yeah. And so the next day, entering the class, I turned it off and I got on with class. The next day, I played OV, I played Orthrealm. Yeah, like blasting it, and like they had no issue with it.
I know.
And so then I was like, no, this was just fine, but it's just like some of the things that are. Like you had to cover like usually when I think of somebody covering their ears, they're blocking out a certain like violence of like visceral, like like
it's physical,
but it's like it's obviously like cultural violence was essentially was
what violin is not supposed to be doing that. It was an affront to the violin or whatever, you know.
No, which is like a real thing. So I mean, I'm sensitive to all those things, and I would just say that where I find myself too is about my own social interactions, meaning I'm not in something that might be described as another genre, not necessarily because I find the attributes of the genre I find myself in as attractive necessarily, but it's just where I am at this point. And it's how much does one fight their way out of that, or ad hoc their way with what they have, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah,
but I definitely agree with the whole genre thing. And I mean, not sorry, I know you wanted to riff on like the perils of the academia in a minute, but I will just say,
yeah.
So speaking of that, like I'm presently, because the other thing you mentioned me being interested in classical music, but I did come up through a lot of jazz music, and like so maybe my biggest hero is actually Charlie Parker. And when I read an article about 15 years ago, George Lewis's article, Improvised Music After 1945. And he kind of, it's a fascinating article for various reasons. But one of the things he suggests, and I'm oversimplifying this, but is that, well, you have Cage in the late 40s, early 50s, making this American experimental music. And then you have Charlie Parker, who's actually making this American experimental music. But the canon of, the Western classical white eurological framework of music kind of excludes Charlie Parker because, well, there's a space for Charlie Parker. I mean, sure, he's innovative, but he's innovative in jazz. In jazz, right? So it's like this kind of thing. It'd be really interesting to just, well, why can't this is just this is experimental music. I mean, what Charlie Parker is doing is experimental music. With John Coltrane, with Alice Coltrane, with Sun Ra, like that is experimental music. But because of the instrument you might be holding, it's a saxophone, not a violin. Then and then there's just sheer racism involved with those distinctions as well.
Of course. So, but those are traditions that are coming from like somewhat different. I don't know if suppositions is the right word, but just like I don't know, just like types of attention that one. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, with Charlie Parker.
I do. That's why I said I oversimplified the article a great deal. It was just, I found it very inviting to like go back and think of a different way through what I had been taught as the canon of American experimental music. And now this gave me a framework to intersect, artists that I had seen as being outside of that, which was just an attractive thing to me.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, one time I had to teach when I was still living in New York. I taught a music history class at Columbia, and I was teaching like Cage and Ornette Coleman and Pauline Oliveras, and one of the students, I should mention, it wasn't for music people. It was for like it was just like a core
music for humanities,
And this one student, like very well-meaning, like great student, like super smart. But he was like, look, man, I'm not trying to call you out, but I've studied a lot of music and I've been doing lessons since I was 8 and all this stuff. And like, you're the first person who's ever told me about any of this. Like why? Like, are you wrong or is everybody else wrong? And no, it's just this weird thing where you see that it's, I don't know, it's like who you come into contact with too, as far as what you believe about certain
social. It's social. What boxes and like regimes of genre you even get exposed to. Do you listen to much like I don't even know what genre you'd call it, but just this like really experimental, like electronic, like purely electronic stuff, like the Triangle Records type stuff, like Hacks and Cloak or Rabbit or any of that kind of stuff, or like I don't know, Lee Gamble. I mean, do you mess with any of these like these kind of artists that are like coming out of club music, but they're like super out like at all?
Not like I don't seek it out, but I probably have been exposed to it. And so what I mean by that is just to clarify that there's not, again, this idea of order of preference. These days, I don't really seek out any music. In other words, I don't have an order of preference. I don't go looking for anything at this point.
Right.
It's just
Things
like whatever I come into contact with, I'm like, oh, that's cool. And So I don't know those names that you mentioned.
I'll send you some stuff, because I hear some of the most fresh stuff I hear is kind of from this world of like a purely electronic music that, it might come out of the world of, I guess, techno or club based music, but it's outside of purely danceable stuff, and some of the stuff reminds me of your music, just in the way that samples are being used, also just the intensity of the sounds, and just this way that a limited but really intense sonic palette with these. You use your stuff. Some of these sounds as samples. I mean, they sound like, you know, like in the sense.
Me?
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like just like not exclusively, but in that non-melodic way where you have sonic objects, you know, that are then like being rearranged. And yes, some of these artists, it has the same sort of treatment of these sampled sounds that. But some of those artists is interesting because it does have this like threshold where it's like outside of dance music, the way it's unfolding, but it doesn't exactly get to that quote unquote, in my perception of it. It's like almost crossing that threshold of like, this feels like quote unquote new music. It has something.
Oh no! So I've checked out a lot of that stuff. I just don't know who the artists are.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm sure people.
So,
It has like something to do with the way time is being wielded, or like how actively the composer's hand is moving sound. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but you know what I mean?
It's like just to use a concrete musical example, like things that I've found really interesting in that world is when you have a beat that, at least to me, I'm predominantly like feeling one beat. But then as the mix, like you hear secondary beats that like there might be a clave doing like a hemiola or something.
Yeah.
But then there's this other bass line that you're not even, it's so sub bass, you're not aware that it is actually creating this polyrhythm with the clave. But then when that crosses a threshold, when the bass line, either timbrally or decibel, like it might change timbres and then it comes into your perception, like the beat flips, but not in that repetitive way of the orthrealm of where you just hear the accent in a different place, but like your relationship to time all of a sudden like flips. Is that kind of, are you familiar with?
Not exactly, but I mean,
Okay.
I can see like the kind of thing you're talking about though. Like I can picture what you're talking about. Yeah, I just like, but just even just perceiving just like the genre implications of something, like expectations. Like when I hear the beginning of one of your pieces, not just knowing you, but even if I didn't, you know, it's like I don't know if it's the instrumentation or if it's just how it's unfolding after the first 2 minutes. Like I'm pretty sure it's going to go on for at least 10 minutes. And that it could go on for a really long time, like just on some genre expectation. Whereas like with that kind of music, this kind of electronic music, it's like it's so similar in so many ways as far as the way sound is being treated and moved around. But I'm not sure if it's because of the genre associations of the sound or if maybe a difference in how the sounds are being moved around that I'm like, I can tell that this is not going to go on for a half hour. Like I know, like, and that just changes your whole perception genre wise of like how you're anticipating, you know what I mean? Like I'm not like,
I feel like I have at least my own opinion on why some of that exists in my own genre, which is, I think, has something to do with just the economics or logistics of the situation, which is if you write a piece for a whole bunch of instruments that then have to come together and rehearse and then perform, there's this kind of like diminished returns for the amount of effort again, which is if I'm going to ask them all these people to like come together and do this thing, like under my kind of like, they're like, I've authored this text that they're all going to now perform, like doing it for 6 minutes.
No, I know.
Or should we do it for 20? I mean,
right.
In a way,
it's
like
bang for your buck.
Yeah. Like one of the genius things I always thought about that the Cage piece 433 was just the 433, right? Because like if it's like an hour and 33, if you haven't like given up to that, like what is being asked of you to like enter this space and listen a different way, and like then it's like a kind of almost again violent manipulation of your time. Like you either have to like get up and leave, or you have to really succumb to this. But 433 is great because if you think it's just like a terrible manipulation of your own values, it's
over pretty.
It's 4 minutes and like you
like one
really
side of a
mad.
7-inch. Yeah.
Right, you can't get mad. But so I do think about duration a little bit in that context, like how many people are doing this thing.
Yeah. Remember what happened to that guy? I'm sure he's still doing great stuff. That guy Dylan, the guy like something Dylan, was it like not Matt Dillon, Charles that composer who's like doing stuff with like these 1 minute pieces. He had something called Wool. It's like really dense orchestral music.
James Saunders.
Oh, James Saunders. Why am I saying Dylan?
I don't know.
James Saunders. Yeah.
Yeah, James Saunders.
He had like 1 minute pieces. Is he still?
Oh yeah, no, they were even shorter than that. Yeah, he wrote. I think that piece is called. It's like 511 mosaics or something. And actually, that's a really apt like piece to bring up, because like it can either be super long. It's not just little pieces. That piece in particular is for large ensemble. But you can play it 500, like you can play it in every permutation. Like
yes, the mosaic.
From beginning to double bar, it's only like 17 seconds. But since you can play it, and I don't know, there's like 8 instruments or something. I forget, I can't do the math on the top of my head. But if you do every permutation of solo to full, octet, then septet, then sextet, and every combination of quintet, quartet, trio, duo, blah, blah, blah. It comes out to something like 511 or 517. So it can either be a super long piece or a super short piece, or it can be
modular,
like very modular. So
yeah. This is totally off topic, but I can't remember. There was some band, I don't know if it was Negative Land or Boredoms or something, but they like made some pop album, but it was like a conceptual pop album, but it was just a verse and a chorus. Each song was just a verse and a chorus, and it was just like, yeah, like just repeat that, like play that twice. Like it was like you have the ingredients, like you don't need to do it twice. Anyway, like yeah, man. I mean, I don't know, like I'm trying to think of like stuff that I really wanted to like definitely cover. I mean, we're definitely covering this stuff. I'm into, I mean, academia. We don't have to like rag on academia. I feel like academia is being in the humanities, it's being totally liquidated. And then in STEM, it's just like, do this or you will no longer exist, But as far as like music, I don't have a sense of where the musical academia is at. But are you an anomaly in academia? I mean, are you like, as far as your stuff, it's the thing, man, I don't want to like.
You mean me personally?
Well, yeah, like you and your work, because like I don't. Okay, this is the thing. Like I don't want to overly deter.
No, dude, I mean,
is that you with the beeping? I don't know.
I don't think so.
Oh, I might a little bit. I might sometimes put you on. Wait, which is the one I might put you on? I might put you on full screen like that sometimes. Anyway, but what was I gonna say? Yeah, like I get the vibe that in so many areas of academia now, everything has to be political and social and like narrative. Like, is that, or am I like misperceiving that? I mean, are you like, I mean, the fact that your music is like what you say about it is very much about pure like form, sound, your compositional process, and not attempting to have any commentary about the, like just sort of letting other people do that interpretation and not like, are there a lot of people working in academia, composers that are on your tip, or are you sort of unusual in that regard?
I'm not sure really. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, do you know what I'm asking though? I mean, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
I mean, a little bit. I also don't know if, I don't know if your characterization, I also don't know how to characterize myself, but I'm not sure if that, again, like when I write program notes, that might be a little different. Like if you, I don't mean to sound like a old fogey professor, but like if you were in one of my classes, you might not think that I'm as clearly trying to chart some sort of neutral space as it might seem when I'm describing my own music. In other words, like when I have to deal with somebody else's text or somebody else's ideas about applying social ideas to music, I might be very critical and very outspoken, and but then not do that again in my own music
in your own work
for the reasons that we've already talked about. So I kind of hesitate to make that judgment because I also haven't been inside other, like these days I'm not sitting in other people's classes, so I also don't really, I have to say I don't really know what is going on in like
no, okay, no, that's an answer. This answers this gives me a sense. I'm just sort of, I'm interested because it's just like well, this is the thing, yeah, it's like I said, I just like also, what I mean by politics maybe is like I mean it more in a vague way, but just like I just like for example, I mean you were talking about how George Lewis's article was talking about how certain like artists from the jazz tradition, Charlie Parker, that there's like a racial aspect to how they're been excluded from that discourse and stuff. It's like that kind of way of looking at things. I feel like just the entire canon of the Western canon of classical music, as it's as it's looked at and as it just is or was, is it seems like so much is so much of work now is about criticizing that and like sort of taking a bird's eye view, or like sort of looking at the canon as other or criticizing it. And so it sounds like you're saying that you get into that with your lecture, with your actual work as a teacher, but maybe that your work itself isn't really about that kind of commentary, and it's more just.
Well, yeah, I'd say just a little bit more that I won't say what my work is. I just say how I describe my work tends to be only go up to a certain point. But yeah, so like the example you just mentioned, the George Lewis article. So I'm actually going to teach a course like in the spring. The course is based just on that article. That's the starting point, where I'm going to track one path through American experimental music that is like from the perspective of, instead of the New York school being something like Cage, Brown, Feldman, like what if it's Bird, Train, Miles, and like what does that beget, and just like follow that path. But at the same time, I just finished teaching a course predominantly about like Beethoven string quartets. Yeah. But so it's not like, but you can do that in both critical ways. That isn't throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I mean, there's a lot of ideas obviously that need to go away. I mean, or at least be challenged and openly discussed. So yeah, I mean, I would not. Yeah, I don't.
No, this answers the kind of no. This gives me a sense. Yeah. I mean, just even the fact that you don't have like an immediate, like, yeah, I know what you mean. That actually is an answer for me. Like, I don't know. It seems like you don't have a fraught relationship with teaching in the academy. Although maybe you can't say if you do on it. You're like, it's your bread and butter. But
no, there's also, I mean, I would also say, I don't mean to be an apologist in any way for the academy, but there's also painting with too large a brush can be difficult, because there are like liberal arts schools, there are like state schools, there are like these private universities, there are research universities, and all of the inhabitants in terms of musical inhabitants at these various types of institutions, they typically have different engagements with students in different ways. Yes. So in terms of the kind of like liberal arts, like I'm in a research university, so that might not be as, when you talk about a certain kind of why aren't you teaching cultural studies more, Alex? Well, I'm at a research university. They want, like, I have to produce research, and in my field, research is like commissions, and I have to like, so, but that might be different than somebody that's teaching at a different institution with a different agenda, different goals for like what they want to give students. So that's why when I hesitate, it's also not to like play dumb too much. I'm also trying to say, like, it really just is different within different streams of the academy. That
tells me something as well, because I went to Wesleyan for undergrad, so it's like it's a very different kind of place.
Exactly.
They won't teach you what a Neapolitan chord is because it's racist. I mean, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like that's not actually true at all, but that's a ridiculous caricature. But I mean, because there's also like there's institutions, not just different academic. Oh, by the way, do you have a time limit, or what's your?
No, I'm cool.
All right, yeah. Because there's also I've also thinking about just what your relationship is, just also being with like New York, just you being at MSM before in Columbia, and just with us rolling in Z's in New York. I mean, you're a New York musician for sure. I mean, even though being in Chicago now, it's the I love the people who watch this are like the coolest people. I feel like we had an interesting relationship with New York Z's, and then you just thinking about your work in the context of New York, because there was I guess in the 80s, and there's that sort of downtown uptown thing, and I've got into new music stuff through downtown stuff. I mean, it was very much like, I mean, this is in the 90s, but I was like hearing about Zorn and, coming out of like improv, and then Zorn, and then, now through him finding out about Charles Warren or whoever as this sort of counter thing to that. And obviously by the time you started, your career, like that divide wasn't as much of a thing exactly, but it still in my mind did kind of represent, I mean, just the way in which like Columbia, just Uptown, like there still was this thing of like on music that's like polystylistic, postmodern. People don't use that term as much anymore, but you know, that sort of Zorn, like multi-language, multicultural genre colliding thing versus what you're doing and kind of what you had Z's doing at first. I don't know. Any thoughts about that? I mean, just in terms of like language, or culturally, like, it always seemed like there's more of a unified, like what you're doing was more about unity. I mean, you talk about the one and the many, and you might be negotiating the one and the many, but I've never heard your music or the stuff you wrote for Z's or anything as, it never came off as like, you talk about combining disparate elements in your music, but I never heard a multicultural or multi-linguistic.
No, I know exactly what you mean.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. So this is to get back to part of the earlier discussion. And actually, this is a perfect point you make, because this is why you might find it easy not to read what I talk about in my own music as explicitly socially linked. And that's because of getting back to this idea of margins of difference. So when I talk about sounds that are desperate, like things that are incompatible, well, like what makes something incompatible is already a question. And like what is a thing? So, you know, I think I'm dealing with margins of difference that aren't genre based. So I'm already dealing with it in terms of concentric circles. You might say genre is one circle, and within a genre, then there are margins of difference. And then within this subgenre, there are margins of difference. So you're all still trafficking in differences. It's just at what level are the differences being, like what to whom are the differences being read by, or with whom do they register? So, but to tie that into your previous thing about Columbia and stuff, yeah, it was an interesting time because I did miss the big rift between downtown and uptown. I mean, it was still happening a little bit, but at the same time as I got to Columbia, George had just come to Columbia after who had I think George is from Chicago, but then spent a whole bunch of time in the New York downtown scene before then going out to the West Coast and then coming to Columbia. So I got back to when I entered Columbia, it was also George's first year at Columbia. And at that time too, like Tristan was kind of on the way out or thereabouts. Oh,
right. He stopped. I didn't realize that.
So it's weird because the Columbia at that time still had a very, I think in the public eye, it still seemed like a very modernist kind of, you know, like fortress of modernism kind of vibe. But that wasn't my experience there. My experience was that it was a lot more, even by genre estimations, it was a lot more dynamic and, you know, open than might have been the case. But again, I don't want to presume to know what other people thought about.
I don't know, because I just modernism, you know, I have my own idea of what that, when I throw that word around, you know, it's like, it's probably not totally historically accurate. But, you know,
I mean it even in the constraints of music, which already is also, I agree, problematic to even kind of try and hone that into some kind of pithy definition. But whatever you want to do with that term, I'm saying I was already finding, just by the metrics of Uptown, Downtown, I was already finding like that it wasn't what I had kind of, what I was hearing other people when they talked about it, even in the recent past, like like the late 80s and stuff. It's not what I found there, but
yeah. I mean, I just, when I think about just, I guess when I think of modernism, I don't necessarily think of like process-based music or serialism or anything like that, but I do think of music for music's sake type of, you know, just like music as having the value of music being pure sound, pure form, pure music and time, like just the idea of music, that music can exist for its own sake, divorced from a social context. I don't know if that's, Does that
that makes sense? I mean, that's not how I most of the modernist composers that I've been attracted to, or at least I'll say modernist, because I think I've heard them labeled as modernist, but their work is full of actually pretty concise social and political engagement.
Who is a modernist composer? Because I'm a little bit, I'm sloppily using words.
I don't want to, again, I don't want to create a regime, but I mean, I'd say a lot of, from the early 20th century, you could say that the Second Viennese School,
that's what I think.
It's kind of early, but this is what I mean. Like that's already, and this is where things could get really naughty in terms of or knotted up. Like I read that stuff as reactions to the past. So it was an attempt to align current practices, like divorced from kind of Judeo-Christian values and like the church being the hierarchical figurehead, and it was trying to align more with, well, if how can we reimagine things as being more in line with a more secular modernized world. Now I know that's super generalized, but I just meant within that you can do that project and still be rather write works that are full of various social whether critiques or not,
but in that music though, like if any critiques being made in that way are embedded in the structure of the music, like serialism as a practice having these social or political implications embedded in its technical structural essence,
yes
like
no.
You know what I mean? No,
I mean, I know what you mean. I just don't know if I agree. Again, this is whether you believe. I don't know that I believe the composers. Like
you don't believe their composer notes, yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't, or it just seems easier for me to like, if some composer starts using words like emancipate the dissonance, it's hard for me to not think about that in some kind of political, social way.
No, for sure. I know those guys had like on some Marxist. I know Adorno was into those cats like for those kind of like post-Marxist kind of reasons. I guess okay, maybe I'm going a little bit far afield with the thing that I was kind of trying to say about just like when I think about Columbia, like not in a negative way at all, but when I think maybe modernist isn't the right word, but like, unified language. And I know, but you're talking about like margins of difference. I mean, that kind of, that answers sort of what I, like that you're talking about just like smaller margins of difference.
Well, you might, I mean, if now I think I have a better idea of what you might be getting at. And I know since we haven't spoken so long, we just might not, like, might be some semantic issues, but you might be thinking of what I've come to think of as what's called like new music festival culture, which I would say is part of what I encountered at Columbia. This idea that there is this community driven that exists a lot in just the way people pass through these various festivals, and then at each of these festivals there's these cast of characters who are kind of like who you go there to see and deal with, and then there's also a crew of ensembles that are part of that too, and like that network is like a real thing.
Right.
And that might be what you're talking about, and that is something I have experienced and have like there are both I have good feelings and negative feelings about all of that. So but I mean, is that coming closer to what you might mean?
No, okay. not so much. No, but I mean no, but you addressed what I was talking about. Just talking about just margins of different, just the ways in which your music is different than John Zorn's music, for example. I mean, just or the Columbia, like the Wet Ink composers in general, are dealing with more languages that are internally more consistent, appear internally more consistent and less multilinguistic or something than quote unquote downtown music.
I can but I don't want it to sound like these narrow margins of difference or some attempt to run away from a fight. So what I mean by these narrow margins is, like, speaking of Alvin, I remember Alvin Lucier telling a story I'm paraphrasing obviously, but another composer, I guess, came up to Alvin and said something to the effect of like, you know, I use all these close intervals to try and generate audible beats in my music too. And like they should be there, but I just don't hear them. Like they're just not there. And why are they so present in your music? And Alvin said, it's the only thing there
that I'm doing. Yeah. No.
There's nothing to mute that experience. And the thing is in very subtle musical phenomena, what you realize is the listener really does have this ability to mute things that they maybe at first perceive as extraneous to the intended object of the music. So that if there is a kind of beating, like they quite literally will not hear it. Yeah. If they get a sense that in terms of like the hierarchy of the experience,
that it's marginal.
It is noise, right? So I guess what I'm saying is when you say like, yeah, I'm not trafficking in difference like Zorn, well, to get to what I want to say about these thresholds of hearing and how things are grouped, I have to remove a lot of other things. And if I was moving in kind of vignettes of genre, and this could just not be true too, but like if my feeling is that by isolating, like having some umbrella of similarity across, like there's some kind of thread of similarity across the entire work, that other differences then become perceptible because something has to be oblique to the similarity that is prevailing otherwise. So, I mean, maybe
totally. It's funny, like the amount that I liked how I don't know, you've always been you've never seemed like you're like rebelling against or like against your surroundings. Like, you know what I mean? I never heard you at Columbia being like, man, like I'm not like these other cats here, or like frustrated with your, you know what I mean? I feel like you've always been like thriving at what you're doing, like in the place, you know what I mean? Even though Z's was kind of, well, actually no, in the Brooklyn kind of scene though that we were playing in Z's, I think we definitely were providing a critique of that scene, maybe a little bit.
Oh yeah, for sure.
For sure.
I talked to a fellow recently. Maybe you talked to the same person who's writing a book about that scene or something.
No, who?
Maybe you might get. I'm sorry. His name escapes me at the moment, but he lives in Brooklyn. He's writing a book about
Cisco. Is that Cisco Bradley?
Yes.
Yeah, I think Cisco. He interviewed me. He did an interview with me about that like 6 years ago or something, and then I like never heard about it. So I don't. But maybe it's still happening. That's cool. Did he talk to you? Did he talk to you?
I talked to him. I talked to him maybe a few months ago, and it really was interesting to kind of revisit. Whatever transgressions might have been, part of our Z's hang in the Brooklyn band scene, for sure, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I think just there was something, I don't know, this idea of unity. I mean, that was a very, with the uniforms being the sort of most like fetishistic kind of, performance of that, this like an internal unity. And everyone kind of writing. I mean, I feel like you and Sam kind of laid down the aesthetic things, and then the stuff me and Matt wrote were like sort of like slight like departures, but from that there's this core idea, of what the band was. I don't know.
Just not even. I was thinking. It was almost now. It's so obvious to me. I can't believe that at least according to me, that stuff. We arrived at it fairly organically, or at least we didn't discuss it that often, or maybe we did. I don't think we did, but looking back on it, it seems so premeditated, almost in, like when I think of something like, again, early modernism, where just almost in a gimmicky way, the dance moves from the Rite of Spring, at least as they're reported, are kind of just straight up the inverse of every, like classical, like just the way you hold the body, like, like your chin's supposed to be up and your shoulders out and your back arched and your feet out. And like Nijinsky had them all just like,
was that the deal?
Just one-to-one doing the opposite.
Yeah.
I feel like to some extent, Z's almost like, it was like checking off a list, like individual kind of expression. Not,
right. Not giving a fuck. That's off the list.
Just all of these things, like, the music stands, for the music.
Well, labor, I feel like there was a big
Labor,
labor was a big part of that, just being like, no, we're not pretentious, you're just lazy, like just basically, that kind of critique. Because that's the most obnoxious.
I feel like also not having, I remember writing for that group was so difficult for not having a bass, but in looking back, like having some kind of like two basses or a bass, like I think to keep the symmetry, it would have had to be two basses, which just would have been too many people too. But also just any kind of bass voice in that group would have really ripped out what is so like what gave it also just this otherness. It just like wasn't part of that scene at all, just because it just didn't have the same sediment of
low end. No, totally. These things, it's crazy though to think about something that's like so inspired, but then you look back and you're like, that actually could only have happened then. It's like these things, it's like no matter how much individual, I don't know. It's like no matter how from above an inspiration or how organic, something feels, it's always to some large extent, defined by the social context that it comes up out of, like, yeah.
I know. Sorry, I know we're running late, and I know you don't want to go on memory lane, but
oh, dude, I wanted
to point out two things.
We could go forever, man. I was only asking about time for you.
No,
I'll go for hours, man.
Because Cisco was asking me recently about Z's, I did remember when we played at this place, Rudyard Kipling's in Kentucky. Do you remember this? And like,
was that when the tree went through the car?
Yes, but before that, what I was going to get at was before that, like a couple of things happened, which is like the band, like we were headlining, and this local band was playing before us, and they were so mad. Like they thought we were just like they thought we were, everything about us was like mocking them.
Yeah.
Like they thought it was like, they didn't realize we were doing it in earnest. And I guess what I was bringing up a moment ago is that when I look back on it, I can't believe that we were doing it in earnest. It seems like so almost like perfectly ironic for the moment but we weren't, at least as I can remember. At least I was doing it earnestly. I think we all were. And no, but they were. I remember almost like I remember having a conversation with either you or Sam. Or like, are these people gonna fight us? Like, are they gonna?
No, they were vibing like really hard. Are you familiar with the contemporary internet term weaponized autism? I feel like that Z's was fulfilling that weaponized autism, but yeah,
and the other one was getting to San Diego. I think in the first place we were playing, and we were getting pretty like, brutally heckled. And at one point, I think somebody yelled like, "When are you guys gonna rock?" And Sam got up like in a tune and was like, "We are, motherfucker," or something like that. I don't know. I might be misremembering that, but I just remember these kind of things. And I can't believe I didn't recognize at the moment that it was, well, maybe it's because I just didn't know that what was it, like a hard rock scene or like emo, like I forget like even where we were.
Well,
like, who were we rolling with in all of those tours?
I think at that point, I think like early aughts, it was like, in Brooklyn, it was like that more like experimental, noisy kind of underground DIY post-punk kind of vibe. But then I think when we went out of town, then they were like a little bit more still in the 90s, like emo hardcore. Because like we were on Trouble Man, right? So Trouble Man Unlimited, that was definitely like the pivot point, right, between like sort of screamy OG screamo and then the sort of the more avant type shit. But we didn't even, just to fill out that story though in Kentucky, so these guys were just vibing us so hard, like not talking to us, like fucking with our sound check, trying to fuck with our money. And we were just like, man, this is like the worst vibe. And there's a big rainstorm outside. and that's what happened. And so we're in the parking lot, and we're literally in the middle of a conversation about why these guys, like, maybe they want to fight us or whatever. And this rotting tree splits in two and just impales their car. Just like out of a movie, like just straight through, just poltergeist tree, like right through their car. That was, we were just like, right?
Yeah, that was so bizarre.
Yeah,
that was
nature.
Yeah.
But I don't know, dude. I mean, there's people who are still definitely into Z's, but that's like, yeah, that whole scene though that we were part of, that's not the vibe in New York really at all anymore. You know, there's all these different scenes, but there isn't like a continuation. That whole sort of Todd P, like that whole scene that we were playing in, it's like there isn't like, oh, like the next generation. It's just difference, you know. It's just like different shit happening.
Oh, as it should be.
As it should be. Yeah, it's exciting. Totally. I mean,
it was so specific to that very. It was like, wasn't that? It was like a big Wesleyan migration or something, right?
Well, a lot of liberal artsy, of post-liberal arts. You also see how bougie a lot of this stuff was. You know, which is
absolutely. Well, that's the thing. You know, with my own relationship to Z's, that's where I had a really hard time with just that tour scene because I mean, this sounds terrible. I just didn't like playing to the people we were playing to. I just didn't get along with anybody because I found it very, I mean, I would just get vibed constantly for not fitting into all of these, checking the box of, Brooklyn hipster,
like pretending to
culture.
Be poor, essentially, is what you're saying. Like slumming.
So, So that was my tough time with.
Yeah. Well, but the music was a critique of that, though. You know,
it was. It's interesting how it was, and we did talk about it in that way. I'm just surprised that the elements that at least I took for granted as coming out pretty organically, I'm surprised that they were that kind of one-to-one in opposition of some of the things that I
right.
Yeah.
Right. Like you didn't mean it to be totally contrarian, but it happened to be actually just like a corrective. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I don't like the idea of contrarianism for the sake of it, but some things just need to be corrected, man. You know, some things just need to just be brought around, you know. I think just that vibe with labor, you know. Let's say, you know, it's talking about preciousness versus unpreciousness. I think that Z's had enough of the unpreciousness to function in that scene, and yet the amount of labor that went into it had that preciousness that the scene didn't get, or just didn't have the willpower to muster up. You know, this kind of I don't know, it's like a critique of slackerness, or a critique of this sort of fake affected kind of fake naivety, you know, of like, oh, man, I don't even know what a C major chord is, you know. And it's like, well, you could have, but you just chose not to, you know.
Yeah, I remember just one thing that stuck out to me was at some point we had like an all super quiet set, like triple P's. I think it was that piece, Bump.
Oh, we only did Bump?
I think we did some shows where we like no, not on like the tour, no, but I remember we had a piece that we would do that was like super. And the Maces was quiet too.
But Maces was quiet, and then Bump was like the clicky sounds.
Yeah, but like super quiet. And I remember thinking that on the one hand, it was a kind of just really like chamber music, and like to the point of, I mean, speaking of like bougie music, to the point of it was quiet enough we could have just played it in somebody's living room for like 3 people, like having tea. So it was like this almost, it was almost like this hyperbole, bouginess inhabiting this like veiled bouginess that ended up like,
yeah. Man. Well, yeah, dude, I think we're good, man. I think we got a nice solid, you know, good solid hour and 40, man. We covered. I don't think there's anything that we didn't cover that I was really hoping we would get to, man. It's great way to catch up, Alex.
Yeah, man. Good talking to you. Thanks for inviting me on. And
thanks for talking, man. I think people are gonna be really feeling this, and already are. I'm gonna send you some new tracks too. I've got some new electronic stuff.
I would love it. And yeah, before we sign off, I did want to say thank you for when I sent you something, maybe, must have been a year ago now. Thank you for the thoughtful comments. I actually, like, speaking of throwing stuff away, I changed a whole bunch of that. I might send you an unsolicited
man,
audio package as well.
I love, well, dude, I think, man, people need to give each other more critical feedback on stuff, man, because I started doing that a little bit more, and I'll send someone a track, and I'll be like, what do you think? And my friend, they'll be like, oh, it rips, dude. I'm like, I know it rips, but something about it sucks, and you know what it is, and I want you to tell me what sucks, because I'm about to put this thing out. You know, like, I'd like to have people just go through a whole record and be like, yeah, cut that entire track. It sucks. That I could use a little of that. So yeah. Maybe I'll send you some next before I'm done with the next thing. See what you have to say.
Cool.
Word, man.
All right, Charlie.
All
Thank
right.
you. Take
Peace.
care.
Talk soon. There you have it. The God, Alex Mincek. Yeah, right? How sick is Alex? I mean, you know that. Everybody knows. I don't know. I always, the end of these things, I always just want to like say a little goodbye, even though I don't really have anything. No live streams lined up, booked at the moment. I've got a couple rants that I'm gonna unleash on you guys in a very unrigorous way. Maybe I'll do another. Like educational video or something in a couple videos. Thanks. Thanks for. I don't know where Alex gets his glasses. Maybe I should have, maybe we should have kept him here longer to take some of these questions. But, yeah. Anyway, thanks for listening, everyone. I will check you guys out the next episode. Peace.